Good morning, everybody. My name is Brayden Hawkins, and I work with Ridley Block Operations. We're a part of the Alltech Feed Division, and we are also the manufacturers of Sweetlix livestock supplement systems. Now, before I dive into fly control, I'd just like to take a second and thank all of you on behalf of everyone at Alltech, Ridley, and Sweetlix for taking the time to reference this video, and we'd also like to thank you for your support of the Sweetlix brand. I know I speak for everyone when I say we're very grateful to be able to play a small part in the success of your operation. And if there's anything that we can do to help, reach out at any time. My personal contact information is at the end of the slide. So without further introduction, let's talk about fly control. And I think it's a very appropriate topic because in my part of the world, I live south of Fort Worth, Texas. I cover Oklahoma, Texas, parts of Arkansas, and Louisiana. It's really starting to warm up. We've been fortunate to have good moisture in a lot of this part of the world. Some of the boys down south could use some rain, so let's pray for them that they get some much needed moisture. But for a lot of us, we've got good moisture and it's getting warm, which is really good for grass growth. The grass is coming on strong. The wheat looks really good and corn's starting to pop in parts of Texas. But on the other side of that coin, it's very conducive to seeing a massive influx in the fly population affecting our livestock. And just in the last few weeks, I know I've seen it myself. So now is a very, very good time to start taking proactive measures so that we can manage the number of flies that are affecting our livestock and ultimately impacting the bottom line that we have economically. And any cushion that we can give ourselves right now, especially considering the volatility in the markets, is just added dollars in our pockets. So when to expect flies, and this is a really good graph from our partners at Central Life Science. They make Alticid IGR and Clarify, and we'll go into some of those details later. But this is kind of their recommendations on when to start and stop feeding fly control. And as you can see in my part of the world, it's actually past that recommended time that they say to start feeding fly control. Now, it's certainly not too late. There's a lot of fly season left, and it's just going to get worse before it gets better. But the reason that they have those so early is because it takes time for that additive to work through the cow's digestive tract, treat the manure, and then to get an adequate treatment of all of the manure in your pasture takes a good amount of time. Roughly 21 to 28 days is the amount of time that they say it takes. So it's not one of those situations where you stick a fly control tub or a fly control mineral or a fly control block out in front of them and the next day your flies have disappeared. It takes time to reduce the number of flies, and you need to give yourself a pretty good window there. So it's not too late, but we need to start acting quickly. This is another good time to stop and point out there's no silver bullet when it comes to fly control. Just using a feed through isn't enough. I think we've got to take a very broad approach to this and continue to use external treatments to go along with the feed through to get the best coverage and to make the most significant impact on our bottom lines. Now we have to be able to calculate our cost and make sure it still fits within our budgets and things like that. But to truly get the best treatment, we've got to come at this situation from multiple angles. So that leads to the million-dollar question: why is fly control important? And I could have a 10-page presentation on this one question alone, but these bullet points summarize it pretty well in my opinion. The biggest situation is the amount of stress that it causes on livestock as a whole. You can see the picture of the calf that's just getting ate up by flies, and you can just look at that thing and tell it's not going to do as good as some other cattle that would be healthier if they didn't have that type of fly population hurting it. Anyone that raises livestock recognizes that any animal under stress, whether it's heat stress, change in location stress, any type of environmental stress, fly stress included, plays a detrimental role in reduction of performance on that livestock, whether it's reducing the rate of gain by reducing feed efficiency, or reducing milk production in brood cows, or reducing reproductive performance in brood cows, are all things that have negative implications on our bottom line, on our profits. And something that I like to point out when I give this presentation sometimes is that it has a really, really significant impact on a bull's ability to get out and do its job. Not only does it reduces its libido, but if that bull's covered in flies and it's spending all of its time up against a tree or a fence or in water, it's not getting out and breeding cows, doing its job. And that's the quickest way to see some pretty disappointing results from a conception rate standpoint, and then a number of live calves on the ground standpoint if your bull's not getting out and breeding cows. At the end of the day, it's all about minimizing our loss of profits, and all of these things that are caused by fly control have a direct impact on us losing profits. So keeping that same economic mindset going into this next slide, I think it does a very, very good job of painting the picture of the real monetary implications that come with reduction in performance from flies. Again, from Central Life Science, they say that stable flies are estimated to cause almost $500 million in economic losses to US beef producers. Phase flies cause almost $250 million in horn flies, which are far and away the greatest culprit, cause around $1 billion a year in lost profits from a producer standpoint. That's a lot of dollars that could be going back in our pockets. So we need to be taking this issue seriously. And I attached a link there at the bottom, and I use it myself. It kind of gives different aspects of the different flies. It's a really, really good resource. I highly recommend you use it. So that's a nice transition into how Sweetlix can play a role in managing the fly population that's affecting your cattle. So I think we have a real advantage in the fact that we manufacture all forms of self-fed supplements: cooked tubs, poured tubs, press blocks, and loose mineral. And the neat thing about it is we implement fly control in all of those different forms. And we use 3 different kinds of fly control. We use Clarifly and Alticid, which are both made by Central Life Science, and Raybon, which is made by Bayer. So if you think about us being able to use 3 different fly control forms across 4 or 5 different types of self-fed supplements, it gives us a very diverse product mix that can work for any stage of production, any production practice out there. And I think that is really, really unique when it comes to our advantages in the marketplace. So just to talk about some details and differentiate between the different active ingredients that we use in our fly control supplements, I thought Alticid would be an appropriate place to start because I think it's the most recognized fly control on the market when it comes to feed-throughs. The active ingredient is methoprene, and as you can see, it's been around since 1975. And I think when it comes to managing horn flies, Alticid IGR sets the standard, and it has for a lot of years. So the way it works is that the cattle consume it through the supplement, whether that's tubs, loose mineral, or a press block. It passes through their digestive tract and is excreted into the manure. Flies lay their eggs that mature into larvae in the manure, and once the larvae start consuming the manure that's treated with the Alticid IGR mimics the hormone that's responsible for the growth and the maturity of that larva into an adult fly, and basically reverses it. Instead of it inhibiting the growth of that fly, it prevents the fly from maturing, and that's why it's considered an insect growth regulator, So something to keep in mind, though, is that it's only effective against horn flies, and those, like I said, are the largest culprit when it comes to economic losses in beef cattle, on pasture especially. But if you have a serious issue with face flies or stable flies, we might have to take a look at implementing other types of fly control that are effective against those different breeds of flies. Next is Raybon, and it's not an IGR like Clarifly or Alticid. It's actually a tetrachlorbenphos, but playing off of where we left off in the Alticid, the Raybon is effective against 4 breeds of flies, and it still passes through the cow the same and treats the manure the same. But when the larvae consume it, instead of them not maturing, it actually kills the larva on site. So little different mechanisms there, but it's still a very effective product we've used for a lot of years, especially in our press blocks. But one point I do like to bring up is that its half-life is quite a bit longer than those IGRs, so it stays in the manure for quite a bit longer. And last but not least is the Clarifly. And like I said earlier, it's also manufactured by Central Life Science, and the active ingredient in it is difluorobenzeron, and it is a chitin synthesis inhibitor. And basically that just means it prevents those larvae, or anything with an exoskeleton for that matter, from forming that exoskeleton. So it's consumed and passes through the cow just like any feed through, affects the excreted manure just the same, but the mechanisms and how it prevents those larvae from maturing is different. Like I said, on the Alticid, it mimics the hormone. The Raybon actually kills the larva. The Clarifly prevents the larva from forming an exoskeleton, and that's how it prevents it from maturing. So really, really unique product. Like the Raybon, it's got a few extra bells and whistles in terms of covering all 4 species of flies, and it's also labeled for horses, donkeys, ponies, mules, you name it. It's a really, really unique product. And I've arguably had the most success from controlling a fly standpoint with this cook tub right here. It's really unique to the market. It's called 4-Fly-Lix with Clarifly. And as you can see in the top right-hand corner of the label, it's labeled for both cattle and horses, which to some people has a ton of value. If they're running donkeys or mules with their cow herd or horses with their cows, and they still want their horses to get some fly control treatment, this is a really unique product. Now, it's considered a mineral tub, and that means it's got a lower consumption rate than your traditional protein cook tub. It sits at about that 8-ounce range, where the protein cook tub sits in about a 3/4 of a pound range. So your cost per head per day is going to be quite a bit lower on this 4-Fly-Lix with Clarifly. It's one of the very few products on the market that's a mineral with fly control that's labeled for both cattle and horses. So if you've got any questions, reach out to your Sweetlix dealer or get a hold of your local Sweetlix distributor, or reach out to me, and we'd love to help and answer any questions that you may have. But this is a really unique product, and I've put some of the unique aspects and bullet points on this particular slide, and it's done a really, really good job for a lot of our customers in the past, and we look forward to it continuing to do a really good job. And to wrap things up, I think this slide is really, really important to point out, because I do put it after the 4-Fly-Lix for a reason, because you can see the picture on the right was a group of cattle that were on a 4-Fly-Lix type product, and the number of flies that are on that particular cow versus the control group on the left, where those cows are just ate up with flies. They weren't getting any sort of feed-through fly control. So you can see just how drastic the difference in the number of flies on those two animals are. Now, we're never going to get rid of 100% of the flies in a cow herd. It's impossible. But there is an economic threshold. They typically say 200 flies and up per animal is when you start seeing negative economic impacts, where the amount of blood those flies are consuming is causing a reduction in performance that has significance from an economic standpoint. So while we can't get rid of all of the flies, if we can come at fly control from different angles, continuing to use external treatments along with the feed through, we can get it down to this manageable level. And I think the cow on the right is at a very, very manageable level of fly control. So to wrap up, kind of like I started, Sweetlix has fly control in every form of self-fed supplement using 3 different active ingredients, giving us a very, very diverse number of products that can arguably cover any type of production practice out there. The neatest point that I like to point out every time I talk about fly control is that when you're feeding a fly control product, you're simultaneously increasing your herd's health and their plane of nutrition at the same time. 2 things that have direct impact on the performance of your cattle and how much money they're able to support you with, and you're able to do it with one product. I put a link to the rest of our fly control products and all of our loose mineral forms, all of our press block forms, or other low moisture block or cook tubs form that we have, as well as our poured tub forms. So with that being said, I certainly appreciate your time. If there's anything that we can do to help, feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk about fly control or love to talk about flies in general. Appreciate your time.